Hey everyone, it's Warriors NRL Fanatics here. Welcome to the live show tonight. I've been joined by a special guest who is a rugby league statistician and analyst who's well known in the Twitter community. Does great work with with the rugby league statistics side of the game. So yeah, I highly recommend you go and check out his work. I put a link to his stuff in the description down below, and his Twitter handle if you want to go and follow him. So before I ask him some questions and get to know him a bit more, it's nice to have you on. How are you doing, Rugby League eye test? It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I know we've been trying to tee this up for a bit of time, and real life has got in the way. So it's great that we finally got a chance to do this. And I think, as I sort of mentioned before we started, it's probably a good week given how the Warriors are traveling to do this.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you on because we've been in talks for quite a while to get something done, and we finally get to do something tonight. So, just before getting into looking into the Warriors side of statistics this year, I want to ask you some questions. Now, before, how long have you actually been doing this type of content, and what motivated you to get behind doing this?
So the first question, doing this specific rugby league eye test content, I've been doing it for 4 seasons now. So I started in 2020, and it was probably the pandemic that pushed me to doing it. Work was a little bit slow at that time, and I was trying to find some sort of outlets for my creativity, and just started up the website. Figured it would be something for just a personal thing with an audience of one, and every day I'm amazed that there's more than about a dozen people who find it interesting. It's really it's really amazing just to see how much the site's grown in the last couple of years. But to go further back than that, so before starting the site, I was doing some content for NRL Supercoach Talk. So I did a lot of their buy, sell, hold content and some other things, doing a lot of analysis from a Supercoach perspective. And I was already collecting the data for that, and I sort of was thinking beyond Supercoach perspectives, and what not necessarily what makes a good Supercoach player or a good team for Supercoach, but what makes a good player in the NRL, what makes a good team, and just things related to that. So I been doing that in the background, and started to post a few things to Twitter, and realized that the length of a tweet is very hard to convey the context needed for rugby league. It's not a sport where say like baseball, where you have a number and it means something. With rugby league, there's so much context within the game. So it started from there, and has snowballed a little bit.
Yeah, so you said you've been doing this for 3 seasons now. So what year did you start off?
Yeah, so I think it's fourth season now. So 2020 was the first. Yeah, so I think I started just after the comeback from COVID. So probably was about around 5 or 6 for the 2020 season in probably late May, probably late June, I think it was. But I mean, my day job is I'm a data analyst during the day. So it's something that I do for work, and it's a really good way for me to just try out new things and do new visualizations or different techniques, and with a set of data that I'm familiar with, and then just being able to apply that to what I do for my living.
Yeah, I was going to ask, regards to that, like, how do you, like, when you do all the rugby league statistics, how do you go about doing it? Like, how do you do it? So,
I mean, like, probably 90% of my work, or the actual work of putting it all together, is probably done in the off season, or it's something I try and set up a lot of things so that everything's automated, so I can just run something and put if I want to do a certain type of analysis, I've got the analysis already ready. I just need to plug in some new data or bring some new data through. So I don't spend a lot of time pulling the data through on a weekly basis. It's more looking at what I've got and saying, okay, what's happening this week? Is there something interesting? And so last week, as you know, if you've read the site, there was a big post on the Warriors, and after they picked up the win, I thought I'd have a look and see what they're doing differently this year. So a lot of preparation work in the off season to get things to the point where I don't have to do a lot of work during the season, and that's by design because I've got a young family and I have a full-time job among everything else that goes on in the world. So I don't have a lot of disposable time, and making sure I've got things to run quickly and easily is pretty paramount.
Yeah, on that, like regards to the statistics side and how you do it, like obviously it's got to be a lot of research being done. Is that right? Is there a lot of research to do all of this, getting to do the background side of the statistics side, or because I'm not really sort of into that sort of stuff, but you try to learn as much as I can. But how do you
sure.
go
I think
about it? Just
I think it's
Yep.
something that I've picked up from my career, and just being one of the key things is just trying to make sure that if you're doing something, make sure you can automate it and have it done quickly, because then you can spend more time looking at the data than trying to clean it or pull it together or integrate it and connect different sets together. So I would say now I've got it down to a pretty smooth science, but at the start it was something that was taking quite a bit of time. So I think it's just practice, and also having knowledge. The more you use it, the more knowledge you have with the data and knowing what certain things mean and what to look at. So it's probably more accrued knowledge than necessarily technical skill.
Yep. Yeah. And do you have a rugby league team that you follow, or you just not really, or you're just more of a neutral, just looking at it from a neutral point of view?
No, I do have a rugby league team. I think it's pretty hard to follow the game and not have a team that you're invested in. So unfortunately, my team is Parramatta. So I've had a very long dry period. Although we've done well in the last few years, it's been a long time between drinks. So I haven't actually done sort of a big deep dive on anything Parramatta related on the site, and it's probably by design, because I don't know if I can be as objective as I'd like to be. I could talk a lot about Brad Arthur's bench rotations, but that's not what we're here for this evening. So, so me, I'm a tragic Eels fan.
Nice. Yeah. There's surely a lot of Parramatta Eels fans come across. I mean, I got to have a live chat with Andy Raymond this year. So,
I saw that before.
Yeah, he's a tragic Parramatta Eels supporter as well. So,
yeah, there's a lot of us around, and we're very keen to see some success. So, fingers crossed. It's not looking great this year, but it's still early days.
Yeah, so on the Warriors this season, regards to putting the focus onto the Warriors now, this season's been a bit of a turnaround from the Warriors in recent seasons, with Andrew Webster coming on board. I mean, you've done a recent post on the Warriors just lately. What are your thoughts on like the Warriors this year, and what has changed statistically from your side in regards to your view on the Warriors than previous years? Because even though it's 7 rounds into the season so far, there's a lot of changes recently in the past couple of years.
Yeah. Usually at this time of year, it's not a huge sample size to look at, just 7 games, and some teams have only had 6 games, given we've got buys this year with the 17th team. But sometimes 7 games gives you a good indication, especially if you're thinking in the course of a game, there's you might be seeing 135 play the balls with in attack and another 135 in defense on average. So that's a lot of instances of things to occur. So you're getting a decent number of runs and tackles and passes and tries and things like that. So whilst it's a small sample size from a set of games from what's actually happening inside a game, it's not too bad. So, but yeah, in terms of the Warriors, the fact they're sitting third this year is amazing. And if you look at the ladder, the only reason they're behind Penrith is on differential, and Penrith have had one less win thanks to the bye. So you could theoretically say they're second if you're looking at on wins. But that sort of turnaround from last year is amazing, considering, and not a lot of people picked them to be that successful this year. But one of the first things that sort of popped out to me when I was looking through the data for the post this week was just how much time they'd spent behind on the scoreboard. So I think they're looking at about 60% behind, 60% trailing. Which is a huge amount of minutes to be behind and still have such a great record. The only other team that's worse than that this year is the Tigers, who've spent nearly 90% of the time on the scoreboard trailing. I think they've only led for 10 minutes all season, and that was minutes 3 to 13 in the first game. So they're having an absolute disaster of a season. But the Warriors at about 61% of minutes trailing, yet they still have 5 wins and sitting third place. It's very unlike the Warriors. And if you look at how they're scoring over the margins from their games, they're getting behind early, and then running a lead down, which again is very un-Warrior-like. It's usually been the case where they've built a big lead, and you see that run down the last 20 minutes. Or if they get behind, they might put a sort of a fake comeback on and get within a try or convert a try or two, and then see it fall away again. So to see them have such a strong second half where that margin comes down and they're sitting in the positives after 80 minutes is a big change for me. That's probably the biggest thing that I can say that's dramatically different from previous Warriors teams. It's not something I'm used to seeing them do.
Yeah, and on that, the Warriors so far this year have conceded tries early on, but we broke that stat last week. I mean, what do you have anything on that? Like, because last week the Warriors just continued to concede points at alarming rate through the first half of starts. So, do you have anything on that to add? Like,
there's nothing major at this stage. I don't know. Maybe if they're I guess underestimating their own ability and not realizing how much they can, how strong they actually are until they're behind the scoreboard. And maybe they're getting a good. Andrew Webster's giving him a good talking to at halftime, and he's doing a great job motivating them or bringing them together as a team. But it seems when their backs are against the wall this year, they're really putting in strong performances, and maybe that they need that sort of. They need that adversity to bring out the best in them at this stage. I'm not really sure. It's again still early days, but yeah, you're right. They are sort of leaking some early points, which is concerning. But I think given their way they've shown that they can come back from that, that's a really strong positive, and hopefully they'll heed well for the rest of the season.
Yep. So yeah, on the Warriors again, in regards to like their attack, is there anything in your eyes that has changed, like in terms of the attacking style of play, or?
Nothing too much against standing out. I mean, obviously Sean Johnson's having an amazing season, and I tweeted some stats about that with some of the metrics that I look at. He's having one of the best seasons he's had since 2014, which is incredible at 32. So he's doing really well. I mean, there's nothing really stands out for them. I know that looking at the where they're playing the ball on the field, they seem to be avoiding the right side a little bit. I don't know if that's playing into it. But when they start their sets, it's not necessarily starting too far down the field compared to other teams. They're sort of middle of the pack there, so they're not getting an early start. A better start to other teams. Yeah, there's nothing that still really stands out. It's probably more on the defensive side. I think that there's been the thing that stood out to me this season. I don't know from your perspective if you've noticed something. Like I was going to ask you what you think the biggest change and biggest difference is this year for the team.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've seen so far, I mean, the attack, I think, is a little bit of a step up from last year. I think we're leading stats. I believe we're leading the stats in quite a few things in terms of attack there, but I think defense is obviously still alarming. I think it's still a bit of a worry. We still need to improve on that area, but I think our defense last week was a lot better. I don't know what you think on that one, because we conceded like 30 points against the Sharks, and I don't know what do you think on that? Because obviously the defense is something that wins your premierships. Like Penrith, they don't concede a lot of points.
Yeah. I mean, just going back to the attack as well. I mean, obviously the change from Nathan Brown to Andrew Webster's quite a dramatic one. I don't think anyone's considering Nathan Brown an attacking genius, and the last couple of stints he's had in the NRL haven't been too fantastic from a point scoring point of view. So it could be just more of an addition by subtraction, adding in a NRL coach who actually knows how to structure an attack. But from a defensive side, I know they're leaking early points, but I think the key for me is that even though they're leaking them, they're working out how to plug the gaps, and later on in games they're not conceding as much. So one of the things I had on the in the post this week, which I thought was amazing, if you look at the meters from difference from play the ball, so not necessarily the run meters, but the actual difference from each of the play the balls, from tackles 3 through 4 and 5, the Warriors have one of the lowest number of meters from play the ball location. So going from tackle 3 to tackle 4 and tackle 4 to tackle 5, they're only allowing about 8 meters per play between each play the ball. And most other teams in the competition are in those sort of high 9s and 10s and even 11s. So that's really, to me, that's outstanding. Again, the Warriors not necessarily a strong defensive team historically. And again, that's part of the reason why they probably had such late comebacks put on them all the time. So seeing them sort of pull in together in defense and trust each other late, especially again late in games when they're having a lot of possession against them. That was one of the things I think from the Cowboys game, is they withstood a lot of Cowboys attack, and I think previous Warriors teams might have capitulated in that situation.
Yeah. And do you have like anything you could share from that post that you put up, like anything like you could share, like that something maybe Warriors fans probably wouldn't know this season?
Well, besides that one I just mentioned, where their defense, like from play the ball is really good. That's out, to me, that was the biggest thing that came out of it. But there's a couple other ones on there. The other one that was a real big turnaround, I thought, was which is probably plays into their ability to score points this season, is their error rate has dropped dramatically. So I look at error rate as sort of the number of touches. So each time someone's passed the ball, you register as a receipt or a touch or a possession, whatever terminology you want to do, and how many times, how many possessions you take to have an error. So, for example, last year, the Warriors were one of the worst teams in the comp. They were sort of, I think, 12th or 13th. They were dropping the ball sort of every 36, 37 touches of the ball. So again, that's not necessarily a number of play the balls, a number of tackles, it's passes. So if you were passing it 5 times a set, it's sort of every 7 tackles or so, but roughly every 36 touches. The best team in the competition was Penrith last year, and they created an error, so every 52 touches. So that you can see where that's quite significant difference there. The worst team in the comp last year was South Sydney, and they were dropping the ball, having an error roughly every 30 touches. So if you look at this year, though, the Warriors are second place in terms of errors per possession at 48 touches per error, and that's only 0.4 behind Penrith, who are first. So they've really turned that around. So another 12 touches of the ball before they're dropping it or throwing a forward pass or whatever you want to count as an error, and that's placing them second in the competition. So they've really tightened up their ball security, which again I don't think has been a historical trait of the Warriors. They've always been sort of throw the ball around. Yeah, but to see that this year, I think it's a really strong turnaround, and probably again part of the reason why they've been more successful. Not that necessarily completion rates are an important stat, but you need to have that ball security in addition to being able to throw it around when you need to. I think that's something that I mentioned Souths were last year, and I think that's where they get themselves into trouble, is the games where they're like free flowing attacking style and spreading it wide once they pass halfway works really well. They usually pick up the wins, but when they sort of the errors come at the wrong spot, or they don't seem to chain those attacking sets together, they really suffer.
Yeah, well said there, well explained. And I've got a comment here and a question for you. He's from the Wise Up TV. He's another Warriors podcaster. He's asking here, hey, Rugby League iTest, can you explain the Sean Johnson metric you posted on Instagram where he's having the best season over the last 10 years?
Yeah, so that's one of the sort of, I'm not a huge fan of those catch-all player metrics where you rate a player based on everything they do, because I think especially in rugby league, a lot of what players do is very role specific. And for a half, especially someone like Sean Johnson, if you think back to his Cronulla days where he was predominantly a single side half with Chad Townsend on the other side, that sort of limits what you can do. And if you think about someone like, say, Nathan Cleary, who's is a primarily one side, but he also drifts across the other side with occasionally, that can influence things. But anyway, the metric is basically looking at what statistics correlate well with winning, and by winning by a greater number of points, and then working out which of those statistics. So working out what the correlation is with those winning. So you want things that contribute to winning. So things like scoring tries, obviously breaking tackles, offloads to a lesser extent, run meters, all those sort of things that you would think correlate to winning. And then the things that don't correlate to winning, like penalties, letting through line breaks and tries, errors, sin bins, those sort of things would missed tackles as well, negatively impact with winning. So adding those sort of things together, and then looking at a player's contribution to their whole team, and then working out how many points on average per 135 possessions. So I've tried to normalize that rather than say, a team like Penrith might have average 160 play the balls a game, whereas someone like the Dragons might average 120. So naturally, a Penrith player's got 20 or 30 more chances with the ball to do something like a run it, or break a tackle, or create a try. So I'm trying to normalize everything at a set rate. So it's basically, if you think of it as per 135 play the balls, which is an average NRL game, how many extra points a player is worth to their team. So I think Sean Johnson, I think I said was 2.3 or something this year. So this doesn't sound like a big number, but when you add up the 17 players and everyone's little contributions and negatives, that's actually quite a good number. I think it's 4th in the NRL this year. So he's doing really well. So just to roughly explain it, if I give a sort of quicker explanation, I'll probably talk myself in circles there. A quick explanation is just on a per 135 possessions, how many extra points a player is worth based on statistics that correlate well with winning games and also winning them by a high margin.
Yep. Yeah. Well said. Then the Wise Up TV is saying here, is that like a plus minus that the NBA uses? He's asking a question here.
It's probably not plus minus. It's probably more like one of their advanced ones, like adjusted plus minus or box score plus minus, one of those type of ones. So it's not necessarily a straight plus minus. You can sort of think of it that way, in that you've got players who are positive and negative, and the way it's set up is that I've got 0 as an average NRL player, which doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad NRL player, because you can still have players who are, fringe first graders who aren't necessarily bad players, but you're not. I guess a better way of saying is you're probably looking at sort of a -1 or a -2 point per game player under that metric is your replacement level player, and that's probably, I wouldn't say a bad player, but they're replacement level. So anyone above that, you could still be a slight negative player, but still be considered a quality player, a regular first grader.
Yep. And this comment here from the Wise Up TV saying, thank you, bro, love your work.
Cheers, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I just want to sort of clarify a lot of that. So some of the stuff I probably didn't go through this earlier, but a lot of the metrics and things I try and look at are based on statistics, things that work in other sports. So I'm a pretty big NBA fan, so I follow a lot of their analytics and just trying to think of things that work there that might be applied to rugby league, and also follow English football, and that's where that sort of expected points model came from, just thinking about expected goals in football and how that could be translated to rugby league. It's not an ideal thing, but I think I've got something that works at a very high level at the moment. So there's a lot of stuff that I've sort of cribbed from other sports and tried to use in a rugby league context. They don't always work, but some of them have.
Yeah, and do you have anything like regards to do you look at other, like what sort of other areas do you look at in your analytics? Do you look at possession as well, or do you look at other things as well, like the defenders? Like, do you look at anything like that in sort of that area?
I mean, possession, yeah, definitely possession. I think that's a really important part of the game. I mean, that's going back to the Warriors. That's one thing this year that's quite different too. They're also, they're spending a lot more time in 20-meter zones. I think their play the ball percentage, about 21% of their play the balls are inside 20 meters, which is the highest since 2014. So they're doing really well there. So yeah, possession definitely look at. I think defense is a really hard thing to track in rugby league. Because so much of it is sort of the effect of something happens. So if someone makes a misread or a mistackle inside and then creates a gap, and then someone gets through that gap, like where do you account the negative play, or is it because someone was at marker and didn't get back to that being dragged out of the line, and being at marker drags them out of the defensive line, and there's a gap there? It's like, I think it's very contextual defensively. So and I think the old adage is that you have to be in the position to make a tackle to miss one as another one. So players completely out of position, you don't get a statistic saying miss tackle or cause line break necessarily. You're just out of position. So I think defense is a really hard one. So I try and look at it at a team level. I think miss tackles and things like that can be indicative of something, maybe in a long-term perspective, or if you combine it with some video analysis. But on a strict basis, if you're looking at someone who's got like a 94% tackle efficiency, are they better than someone who's got a 91% tackle efficiency? I don't necessarily think so. You'd need to know, I think another way, I guess, of looking at it is in defensively, teams tend to run at weaker defenders. So weaker defenders are put in positions to make tackles probably more than they would be expected to normally. So yeah, there's a lot of context involved in defense. I think it's a really tricky thing to model for rugby league, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing it. I just think there's probably a broader discussion, and some more intelligent people than myself need to be could be working it out.
Yeah, I mean that's all well explained, because I don't know too much around that area. You're obviously one of the experts. You know a lot about that area more than me, but yeah, it's good to hear like the analytics side of the game and that. So it's just that sort of different view that you can get.
Yeah, I think the key thing is as well from my point of view. I know a lot of comments I get is like it's rugby league. You can't just use statistics for everything, and there's so much context involved. And absolutely, I would not disagree with any of that. It's very contextual, and so one of the stats that I do is in my stats where I look at the like involvement rate or tackle rates, where I'm looking at how often a middle forward or an interchange forward is making a run, and it's just looking at how often they're doing it. There's no quality basis on there. So someone could be making 10 runs in 10 minutes and they might look really good on my statistics, but you could watch those runs and there might be 10 runs for 2 meters each, and that's worthless. So I think it's good to identify things, but you really need the context involved. So I think that's a really important part of it. Another thing I wanted to say is like I'm basically just trying to use whatever's available publicly. There's a few little things that people have supplied me here and there that I've used, but most of what I use is publicly available. And I know that analysts and front office people in the league have access to significantly more data, more interesting data. So there's people in clubs who are far smarter than I, doing much better work. So this is sort of just the tip of the surface. There's a lot more interesting stuff being done at a club level that we're probably not going to be seeing, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, on there, what is your view like regards to the NRL at the moment? Do you think rugby league's doing a lot more analytically now, or is it still like got a bit of work to do in time? What are your thoughts on that? Because you got Channel 9, they've got like these computers in there, they're trying to analyze it. Do you think they do enough analysts, or do you think it needs to be more done?
I think the biggest challenge is there's a lot of old world thinking within the game. So you have a lot of people who've been in the game for a long period of time, and that's not to say they don't have an incredible depth of knowledge and wealth of knowledge about the sport, but I sort of feel like rugby league is at least 10 to 15 years behind pretty much every other major sport in the world in terms of adoption of analytics. As I said, I know there's people doing great work within the clubs and the league itself, but I think as a widespread thing across all clubs, and also the adoption and uptake of that sort of thing, I think is still quite a way behind. And unless we start getting more of the mainstream outlets using it, they don't have to go into an extreme depth. Like I'm not expecting anyone to be using like there's like tackle rates and involvement rates and things that I look at, or that sort of thing. But you could be looking at things in a more advanced way. I still like the thing that still sort of bugs me is that when you're looking at someone they're looking at the number of times someone's made a tackle, and if someone plays 80 minutes, they're going to make a lot of tackles, and especially if they're getting run at a lot. And someone in the middle of the field, you're making a lot of tackles anyway. So because someone played 80 minutes and they made a lot of tackles, does that mean they do a lot of work, or they're a better defensive player? I necessarily don't think that's the case, but that's what happens. It's you're doing it's a lot of counting stats. Whereas if you look at across sports, other sports, they're looking at rates of things, or number of times something happens per minute, or per 36 minutes, or per number of possessions, or those sort of things. It's not necessarily just here's a number and we've counted it X number of times, and every time you do one, you get a +1. So I think that's the thing. But unfortunately for the major outlets like Fox and Nine, it's the outrage and the crisis and the negative stuff that sells. Like I can tell you for a fact, like doing this site, that putting up a positive post about how well a team's doing or a player's doing doesn't generate anywhere near the amount of traffic of something where I would be saying, here's one of how Peter Valance's latest rule changes caused dramatic problems in the game. So, 2021, I had dozens of posts on the site, and they all did great numbers. And now we've sort of wound back that statistical inflation, not necessarily getting great. I'm still getting good traffic to the site, but I can see that the positive stuff that doesn't rate as well as the negative stuff. So I understand why they do it, but it'd be great if we were moving in a better direction and having some sort of more analytical look at the game, and more talking about more what's happening on field. So Oscar and Jason at Rugby League Writers do some fantastic work, and that sort of content is what we should be seeing on TV, and other sports are doing it, but we are still sitting at player X has to do more, or so-and-so is not living up to their contract, or here's some news that their agent wants fed to the media. So it'd be nice if we moved away from that. Yeah,
and the stuff you do probably deserves to get more recognised in the old negative article. Like that's just what I think personally.
Well, I mean, to me, the easiest. It's not difficult to do if you know what you're looking for, and I think it's something that people. I do get a lot of comments like, "This is really great stuff. We'd really love to be reading more of this in the media." But it takes time to do it. You need to understand what you're doing, or you need to know something. Get someone who knows what they're doing. I know some of the guys, especially at the Sydney Morning Herald, have done some great work, and I think they've done it with conjunction with the NRL. I'm not sure, but they've done some great work with some data-related stories. But it's difficult for that to cut through when you can put a post up about his 17 players that the Tigers let go, and that gets a lot more traction.
Yeah, and just on this comment here from the Wires Up TV, he's asking, what's your thoughts on the stats that NRL use on their website? I feel like a stat like recipients doesn't really tell me anything. Do you think there should be more better stats used on their site? Yeah. What is your thoughts on that?
I don't know if it's better. Maybe it should be. Again, I think there's probably some context, and I know I'm pretty sure there's a glossary or something on there, but I think they need a bit of context. And I think what would be really more useful is having a little bit more customization with the stats. Because if you're looking at something like receipts, someone who's playing a lot at first or second receiver is automatically going to have a lot of receipts. So that's if you're looking at that, you're expecting halves, or maybe you got some lock forwards in there as well, having big numbers there. But if you wanted to look at, say, who's the fullback or a winger who's been touching the ball the most, you probably can't see that quite easily on the website. So I think just something a bit more user friendly would be useful. And again, it's probably not. I don't think it's a primary source of traffic to their site. So they're probably just using whatever the path of least resistance is.
Yeah. Well said there. And anything more? I think anything more you'd like to cover up on before we end the chat?
Just something. I saw your video last week about a couple of weeks ago about you've had one on Tom Ale, and I saw Bunty had a big week this week. So I was just wanted to get your thoughts again on how and I think you were talking about should Ale be starting. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that now, considering how Bunty played last weekend.
So look, I think I've said that Bunty obviously he's not been his stats haven't been reading too well. Obviously, he's not getting much minutes. I don't know. How do you have any how do you have any information like on how many minutes he's getting altogether? Do you have a look into that side, or?
I probably have it somewhere, but it's not something I've looked at. I did see he didn't seem to play a lot of minutes on the weekend, so I was thinking that possibly. I mean, that goes back to what I was talking about with context before as well. If you've got someone who's a starting prop and they need to play 45, 50, 55 minutes, they're going to pace themselves at a different rate to someone who's coming on and playing 20 minutes off the bench. So I think it's probably more about finding the role that suits them. And I think maybe Ale is better suited to that high impact, high work rate off the bench, where he can come on and 20 minutes of chaos, and that might suit him better. Whereas Bunty might be better playing slightly longer stint starting the game. Again, I'm not just sort of throwing those out as probably more examples than anything, but it's probably relates more to the type of player and finding something finding a role that they fit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think last week I think he played all right, but he hasn't been great the start of the season. But obviously he's not getting a lot of minutes, so it's really hard to say or judge.
Yeah, and I think part of that's probably too is Webster coming in and trying to work out the best rotation for his forwards. Because I know there's been a lot of not turnover, but a lot of changing with the team, with Tohu missing some time, and Mitch Barnett out a bit too, and everything going on with Josh Curran and some head knocks with Wade Egan as well. So, and Jackson Ford. So there's been a lot of continuity issues, probably is a better way of framing it. So he's probably still trying to find the best rotations and combinations. So that maybe that's part of it as well.
Yep. Yeah. And National Sports Loaded, he's asked the question here. He's asking, he says, do you reckon that unforced errors should be included?
I haven't seen, I've got not a great deal of understanding of everything that's available for internally for NRL clubs in the NRL. And I think there's probably more there's more detail on errors underneath what we see. I'm pretty sure there's kick errors and things like that. But yeah, I think not only having errors, but unforced errors, because I think that'd be a really important stat for some teams. You'd see a lot of teams where they're coming out of their own area and dropping a simple pass or dropping a ball in a tackle without any significant ruck pressure. I think would be an interesting thing to see. I think there's a far greater penalty to be paid for dropping a ball unforced in your own 20-meter zone than dropping the ball unforced 10 meters out because you're trying to get across the line.
Yep. Yeah. Just one more question I want to ask you before we get on out of here with the chat. Is there any NRL team in particular that you looked at in terms of stats and analytics through the past couple of years that you've paid a lot of attention to the most? Was it Penrith or something like that? One of the successful teams?
Yeah, it's always interesting to see what Penrith are doing because obviously they've been dominating for the last few years, but I think they play a very, I don't want to say safe, but they play a very consistent brand of football. So you don't see a lot of changes necessarily in what they're doing. Melbourne was always one that I always paid a lot of interest in just little things like how they did their forward rotations and things like that. And I guess the other one that I sort of paid a little bit of attention to is the Tigers, because sometimes I can't work out what's going on there. I've had a number of stats like the one I said before where they've played so many minutes behind this year, and last year they had a ridiculous stat where under Brett Camorley teams were kicking 94% of goals, whereas under Maguire they were kicking about 64%. And I went back and looked at where all their tries were being scored, and you can see under Camorley, a lot of their tries were either straight through the middle, not a lot of effort, or tries on the edges, and then players just giving up and not letting them improve the conversion spot. Whereas against Maguire, they tended to be letting in a similar rate of tries, but they were much wider on the field. So there's a lot of strange stuff that goes on with the Tigers. And I don't like to lay the boot into them too much, but they've got some issues, and it's always interesting to have a look at what their issues are.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it's not too hard to, given their recent results over the last couple of years. But anyways, I'd like to thank Rugby League Eye Test for coming on the channel and giving his take on all the analytics and stats side of the game. And go and give his content a look. And I put a link to his website in the YouTube description down below, and his Twitter handle as well, so you can go follow him on the Rugby League Eye Test there. But thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to talk with such a passionate Warriors fan. I'm always happy to talk rugby league with passionate fans, especially knowledgeable ones like yourself. I've been enjoying watching your videos as well, and I'm happy that you're getting to see such a strong and enjoyable team this year. I mean, one of my probably favorite non-Eels players to ever watch is Shaun Johnson. I think if you can't enjoy Shaun Johnson playing rugby league, you must live a pretty joyless existence. So seeing him do well this year and the Warriors do well based on that is a great thing to see, and I hope you're enjoying it and taking it all in.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, and I know it's a long season, and anything can happen. But yeah, look, it's just great to see this team performing very well, and things have changed on the the attacking side to the defensive side. So hopefully we can keep that going the whole year. But yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in and watching, and make sure you do also subscribe to this channel as well. We're getting very close to 2,300 subscribers, and the goal is to get to 3K by the end of the year. So make sure you subscribe if you haven't done so already, and make sure you like the stream and this video as well. And we'll see you all again soon for another live stream or video. Thanks for watching, everyone.